And joining us now, Jonathan Metzl, who's a professor of sociology and psychiatry at Vanderbilt University and the director of its Center for Medicine, Health, and Society. He's the author of several books, the latest of which is Dying of Whiteness, How the Politics of Racial Resentment is Killing America's Heartland. Welcome to Background Briefing, Jonathan Metzl.
Thanks so much. It's great to be here.
So, Jonathan, this is an extraordinary development that took place today with the Supreme Court ruling that blocking President Biden's virus mandate for large employers through the Occupational Safety and Health Administration. And the justices did allow a vaccine requirement for healthcare workers at facilities that receive federal money. The vote on the former, striking down the vaccine mandate for private companies, was 6-3, with the 3 liberal justices in dissent. And on the second vote for healthcare workers, the vote was 5-4, with Chief Justice John Roberts and Brett Kavanaugh joining the 3 liberals to form a majority. So on the former, I find it extraordinary. I mean, it just seems like they're taking the public out of public health. How do you see it?
We've had a 4 or 5 decade war on public health. I think liberals are just starting to wake up to this fact that public health, the premise is that it's apolitical and in the common good. That's how many people think about it. But for about half of America, public health has connotations of surveillance, and it's been cast as the opposite of liberty. And this has been building through the gun debate, for example, where common sense gun reform has been continually derailed by the notion that basically taking away guns is a threat to public health. We've seen it with masks. Now we see it with vaccines. And unfortunately, it just seems to me like the Democratic side is really just waking up to the profound national implications of this fact that it's seen public health as value-free for too long and doesn't really have any tools to combat the messaging around public health for the half of the country that sees it as a form of government intrusion.
But this is also, politically, this is a devastating blow to President Biden, is it not? This is the biggest issue he's dealing with, the COVID pandemic. And it's probably the main reason why his poll numbers are low, because there's so much anxiety out there in the country. And, of course, all he could say today, because the Supreme Court, unfortunately, is basically the final word, at least that's what they say. President Biden said, "I am disappointed that the Supreme Court has chosen to block common sense, life-saving requirements for employees at large businesses that were grounded squarely in both science and the law." So Biden's makes sense. The dissent by the 3 liberal justices makes a lot of sense. In fact, I can read the dissent. It says, "When we are wise, we know not to displace the judgments of experts, acting within the sphere Congress marked out and under presidential control to deal with emergency conditions. Today we are not wise. In the face of a still raging pandemic, this court tells the agency charged with protecting workers' safety that it may not do so in all the workplaces needed. As disease and death continue to mount, this court tells the agency that it cannot respond in the most effective way possible." So what's happening to the country, Jonathan, is just insanity has replaced reality?
What's happening in the country is that we're nationalizing politics and policies that have just been limited to red states for much of the past several decades. And so we never thought that there would be national policies that would do. I'm in Tennessee. They basically dissolved the health department. We have no idea how much COVID is in the air. You can't do a mask mandate. You can't do a vaccine mandate. I think half the country was fine saying that's okay as long as it's happening down there. But what we're now seeing is that the Southern strategy is becoming a national strategy, and it's going to impact a lot of people. This ruling today will impact about 84 million people. And so in a way, it shouldn't be surprising because it's been happening. It's just that now that the stakes are much higher, and particularly so, of course, as we saw today, because the GOP and conservatives control not just the Supreme Court, but many appointments to many of the lower courts as well. The stakes of winning elections and controlling controlling the courts is massive. It's absolutely massive, and we're seeing that again today. And so really, the response is in part about a public health response, but the other response is to win elections and be able to appoint judges.
And of course, the 1-2 punch, I don't know whether you're referring to it, but today not only did Biden and the country get this terrible ruling from the Supreme Court, Senator Sinema, basically just before Biden arrived at the Capitol today for the Democratic caucus lunch, she went to the Senate floor and basically killed the possibility of dealing with voting rights by refusing to budge on the filibuster. So she's doing a death blow to the Democratic Party and to the president's agenda. And now, of course, the Supreme Court has done a huge blow to Biden's ability to deal with the single greatest challenge that he has. It seems like somehow the establishment is deciding to destroy this presidency and to bring about one-party rule. I don't understand it. Do you?
I wrote a book called Dying of Whiteness. It was about how, for many people, power and being a top imagined position in a racial hierarchy was more important even than their own longevity. I wrote that book as a warning based on what I was seeing in 3 southern states. And I think what we're just seeing is a nationalization of that politics, that, telling people, oh, we're going to get sick with COVID or we're going to live shorter lives, that matters to people who already care about public health. But for many people, the drive toward power and domination is much greater, and it's highly, highly racialized, as I saw in my book. And so, unfortunately, it's just an expansion of the research that I found in my earlier work. And the terrifying part is that the checks and balances that we assumed were in place to stop this happening have been overturned, again, because of the politics themselves. And also, to be fair, because the Democrats have not placed nearly enough attention on the importance of the judiciary and putting the right judges in place.
So, obviously, we're talking about sort of the tyranny of the minority, and the minority is gaining more and more political strength. And, of course, their ultimate strength in many ways is through the Supreme Court, which is being made clear today. So what's the answer here? Does the sort of silent majority have to rise up? I mean, look at that Supreme Court. Look at those 6 justices. They don't represent anything like the full plurality and diversity of the United States of America and the people of the United States of America. They're all, except for one, white men. They're all, most of them are members of Opus Dei and far-right Catholic dogma, chosen by this one guy, Leonard Leo, of the Federalist Society. They don't even represent diversity within the Catholic Church, let alone within religion itself across the board. So this is what I find extraordinary, is that how far we've gone down this path of minority rule.
I could tell you that 85% of Americans support background checks, but we're never going to get background checks. I can tell you that many more people voted for Hillary Clinton, but Donald Trump won. Our political system is geared toward the outcome that we saw today. In my home city of Nashville, the Republicans have just divided the city of Nashville, we had our own congressman, into 3 distinct districts so that they would basically eliminate the votes of Black and Hispanic and liberal voters and create a new conservative district for a new conservative seat. And so our whole system is being turned against us. But I also think it's important to recognize that this is the result of a 40-year campaign to control the judiciary that the Democrats have not really paid attention to. So it's no surprise, it's public knowledge that the Federalist Society had a list of judges, and the day Trump took office, that was their goal, was to get those judges into place. And for better or worse, and it's harder with a razor-thin majority, judges were not a huge priority, relatively speaking, when Biden took over. And so the Republicans, I think, have rightly seen that the judiciary is the seat of a lot of power at this level. And the Democrats just haven't had an effective counter strategy. Our Supreme Court justices have not retired in a timely manner. Controlling the Supreme Court was a top to bottom strategy for many people at the GOP level, and it hasn't been that kind of laser focus. It's harder because the Republicans are much more uniform and monolithic party. But this has really been their vision of the Federalist Society and others for quite a few decades, which is if you control the judiciary, you control the power. And the Democrats are seeing now that they don't have a counter. They thought the counter would be a moral awakening or public health. But as we see today, people are willing to lay down on the train tracks in support of power, and that's what's happening now.
And so Dying of Whiteness, the title of your book, is now manifest, right? This is what's happening. The country's dying of whiteness.
I mean, I can quantify for you how many people are going to die based on this decision, and it's a lot, and it's tragic and it's horrible. And in a place like Tennessee, there's no employer mandate for vaccines, and you can't mandate masks, and so people are just sending their kids to school or going to work with people with open COVID, and so really it's inviting a kind of public health catastrophe. Certainly from the framework of public health, this is an absolute catastrophe in the immediate term and also long term, because of long COVID. It's going to have a lot of long-term implications for just the health of the country going forward. But if you see it through the lens of like a power grab strategy, then you couldn't pick a more effective strategy than weaponizing the pandemic, which is what's happened.
But can you make the case that the Republican Party is invested in death? Because it's those that refuse to get vaccinated that are keeping this pandemic going and allowing for these new strains to mutate and become more deadly and more infectious. And as long as you have that, 40 million, and I'm pretty much most of them are Republicans, refusing to get vaccinated, this thing goes on, right? And obviously it undermines Biden's presidency, etc. I mean, I'm not suggesting that Trump is necessarily behind the whole thing, because Trump has actually made a couple of statements which have been booed, where he's encouraged people to get vaccinated. And now he's saying that other Republican politicians who don't want to say they got vaccinated, like Ron DeSantis, the governor of Florida, are gutless. So I mean, am I being unfair? I'm just so outraged by this decision today that maybe I'm just getting a little too steamed up. But can you make the case that there's an investment in death here for political purposes?
I mean, certainly I wrote an entire book about how GOP policies shorten the lifespans of their own supporters and of other people. Again, it's been happening in the South for quite a few decades through gun policy, the refusal to expand Medicaid under the Affordable Care Act, cuts to public education and funding. It's a terrible public health strategy, but it's a brutally effective power strategy. It's led to massive domination of the apparatus of the southern states. And again, Democrats saw it happening in the South and figured there was a kind of gentleman's agreement between two parts of the country. And really, that's not the case. I mean, for all of the amazing work she did over her incredible lifetime, RBG did not retire in time and gave that seat really effectively back to the GOP. What Breyer's doing now, when the Republicans were in that space, for however they did it, they got their person to retire. And so they've got a lot of young justices who are now nationalizing a lot of Southern policies. And so the Democrats should be asking, how can we regain control of the courts? I mean, I think that's been the GOP strategy. And unfortunately, as much as I hate to say it, and it pains me to say it, this is just the first of a number of catastrophic rulings that are going to be coming down the pike in the next couple of months. Indeed.
Trump personally tried to get Justice Kennedy to resign and used his relationship that he had with Kennedy's son, who handled Trump's and Russian money at Deutsche Bank, buttering up the father by saying, what a great son you have, etc. So you're right. It's just they've had their eye on the prize, and now they've won the prize, and we'll all suffer. And I imagine the next ruling will be to overturn Roe v. Wade. I think that's inevitable, isn't it?
Yes. I think it's inevitable. And I think there are other rulings too. There's just a lot coming down the pike. And again, you mentioned before, it was a 5-4 ruling. Even, if you go, your healthcare worker should be vaccinated, shouldn't be giving you COVID when you go for a routine visit.
Right. And 4 justices think it's okay. It's amazing to think that you have a Republican Party that they don't believe in a right to vote, but they believe in a right to infect. How crazy is that?
But again, Breyer's 83 years old, and he's not retired for the time when it would have been safer to retire. So unfortunately, this is the system. No disrespect whatsoever to an amazing, eminent justice.
Right.
But the Republicans are playing for power, and we're playing for the moral high ground. And so, I think it's about time the Democrats figured out how to play for power. But it's going to take a massive radical shift in how we think about democratic politics.
Well, Jonathan Metzl, I thank you so much for joining us here today.
Thanks so much.
And again, I've been speaking with Jonathan Metzl, who's a professor of sociology and psychiatry at Vanderbilt University and the director of its Center for Medicine, Health, and Society. And he's the author of several books, the latest of which is Dying of Whiteness, How the Politics of Racial Resentment is Killing America's Heartland. We can take a brief station break and back examining the other blow dealt to President Biden's agenda today by Senator Sinema, who is refusing to alter the filibuster rule, thus ensuring the Republican voter suppression underway will doom